I used to believe that if you kept your head down, did the work, and protected the company's interests like they were your own, you'd be safe. Not promoted fast, not celebrated, but safe. That was my mistake. Because on the morning my boss fired me, he wasn't angry. He wasn't even nervous. He was calm in that rehearsed way executives get when they've already decided your future in a different room, with people you'll never meet. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that smells like burnt coffee and printer toner. I'd been at the company a little over 8 years, long enough to watch 3 reorgs, 2 CEOs, and a revolving door of visionary VPs who all promised the same thing: alignment, efficiency, velocity. I was the guy who made those words real. My title was Director of Strategic Partnerships, which sounds fancy until you realize it just means you carry everyone else's promises on your back. You coordinate legal, finance, security, product compliance. You keep the client calm when engineering misses deadlines. You translate corporate chaos into a single confident sentence. And for the last 18 months, my entire life had been one deal: a 12B agreement, 10 years, global footprint, multiple work streams, big enough that it wasn't just revenue. It was a market signal, the kind of number that gets said out loud on earnings calls and makes competitors sweat. The client wasn't some small enterprise account. They were a consortium, telecom, cloud infrastructure, and government-adjacent entities across 3 regions, a slow-moving beast with sharp teeth. They didn't care about our slide decks. They cared about delivery, governance, and trust. And that trust didn't come from my company. It came from me. Not because I was special, because I was consistent. I answered at 2 a.m. when a minister's advisor wanted clarification on a compliance clause. I flew out with 2 hours' notice when their procurement team threatened to freeze the contract over a security audit finding. I sat in windowless rooms while executives dropped in for 15 minutes, said something inspirational, and left me to handle the consequences. Over time, the client stopped asking, "Can your company do this?" They started asking, "Can you make sure it gets done?" That became my quiet advantage and my quiet risk. About 6 months before signing, legal insisted we add a key personnel clause. It wasn't unusual at this scale. The client wanted named accountability. So the draft became a Frankenstein of red lines, track changes, and late-night calls. We fought over words like material, reasonable, timely. We negotiated replacement windows, approval processes, escalation paths, and then the client sent one sentence that cut through everything. We will proceed only if my name is designated as key program executive for the first 24 months. Our legal team pushed back. Of course they did. No company wants to be dependent on one employee. But the client didn't budge. So the clause stayed. Not romantic, not dramatic. Just a line in a contract, buried around page 70-something, that essentially said, if they remove me without written client approval, the client can suspend work, withhold payments, or terminate for cause. I didn't brag about it. I didn't even like it. I saw it as a responsibility. My boss, though, he saw it as leverage. His name was Mark, VP of Partnerships. The kind of guy who loved saying, "I built this team," even though the team had existed before him. He smiled a lot in meetings and never smiled in one-on-ones. At first, he acted proud of me. He'd introduce me on calls like I was his success story. Then the tone changed. It was subtle until it wasn't. He started insisting he join every client call, even when the agenda was technical. He'd interrupt me to repeat what I'd just said, but slower, like he was translating it for children. He'd forward my emails to senior leadership with his name added to the top, like he'd written them. And the biggest one? He began preparing the client for my transition. That's what he called it. I called it what it was. Him trying to erase me. 2 weeks before signing, he scheduled a strategic alignment session with HR, finance, and legal. No client, no delivery team, just internal leadership. The invite title was vague. The time was weird, 9:10 a.m., not 9:00 to. That little trick some executives do to feel like their calendar is more important than yours. I walked into the conference room with my laptop and a printed folder of contract checkpoints. Mark was already there, seated at the head of the table. HR was beside him with a neat stack of papers and that practiced, neutral face. There was also a guy from legal I'd seen in passing, never worked with directly. No coffee, no small talk. Mark didn't stand. He tapped his phone once like he was silencing an alarm. Then he looked at me and said, "We're making some organizational changes." HR slid the packet across the table. My name was typed on the final page. Severance terms. Return of property. A confidentiality agreement that had already been pre-filled as if my signature was a formality. I remember staring at the words, effective immediately, and thinking, this doesn't even make sense, because it wasn't just my job. It was the deal we were about to announce to the world. I looked up at Mark and said very calmly, "You know the key personnel clause is in the contract, right?" He smiled like I'd told him something cute. "Legal reviewed everything," he said. "We're covered." The legal guy didn't speak. HR didn't blink. I didn't argue. Not because I was defeated, because I was assessing. Mark wanted a reaction, a raised voice, a threat, something he could label unprofessional and use later. So I asked one question instead. "Who asked for this?" Mark leaned back, folding his hands like a judge. "It's not about one person asking," he said. "It's about direction. We're scaling. We need different energy." Different energy. After 18 months of nights, weekends, flights, audits, and crisis calls, I was energy. I stood up slowly, gathered the packet, and said, "Okay." HR looked relieved, like she expected a fight. Mark's smile widened. I walked out, badge still working, the hallway lights too bright, my head weirdly quiet. In the elevator, my hands started shaking, but not from sadness. From the realization that they'd just gambled with a 12B contract as if it was a quarterly expense. When I reached my car, I didn't drive away. I sat there and opened my laptop, not to beg, not to complain, to verify. But because the moment I pulled up the contract draft, version 17, the one legal had sent, final, I saw it immediately. My name was still there, in black and white. And right under it was the sentence that mattered most. Removal or reassignment of key program. Executive without client's prior written consent constitutes a material breach. I was still staring at it when my phone buzzed. Not a friend, not a coworker, a calendar invite. Subject line, emergency meeting, ELT, HR legal, 10:30 a.m., and I wasn't on it. But Mark was, HR was, legal was, the CFO was, and the CEO's chief of staff. I read the attendee list twice, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because whatever story Mark told to get me fired, senior leadership had just realized there was another story they needed to hear. I didn't drive home. I drove back to the parking lot like it was a normal day. Because the second you act emotional in corporate life, someone writes it down and turns it into cause. I sat in my car for a minute, staring at the building like it had personally betrayed me. Then I did what I always did when something went wrong on a deal. I opened a notes doc and started logging facts. Time Mark pulled me in. Names in the room, exact phrases. Staff reduction, different energy, effective immediately. The version number of the contract draft. The clause language, everything. Because if this turned into a fight, the winner wouldn't be the angriest person. It would be the person with the cleanest record. When I walked back in, nobody stopped me. My badge still worked. That alone told me how sloppy this was. You don't separate someone and forget access unless it's rushed or it's not aligned. The office felt louder than normal, like my senses had turned up. I passed the kitchen. Someone laughed too hard. A printer jammed. A Teams call blared through a speaker in a conference room. And the worst part? My desk was still exactly how I left it. A half-finished coffee. A sticky note that said, "Client security appendix, confirm." Like my life hadn't just been cut in half. I hadn't told anyone yet. I wasn't ready to watch people pick sides in their faces. But HR was ready. My inbox refreshed, and there it was. A short email from the HR partner. Per our discussion, your employment ends today. Please return company property by 2 p.m. It will contact you regarding access deactivation. No, thank you. No, we appreciate your contributions. Just process language. Cold and neat. As if 8 years could be boxed up and dropped at reception. My phone buzzed again. Not Mark. A message from Jenna in finance. The only person on the internal deal team who spoke like a human being. Jenna, are you okay? I just got pulled into an ELT meeting about the consortium deal. Mark is here. HR too. They're asking weird questions. I stared at that text and felt my jaw tighten. Weird questions meant they'd finally understood what they'd done, and now they were trying to find a way to make it not their fault. I typed back, I'm fine. Don't say anything emotional. If they ask about key personnel, tell them to read the contract. She replied almost instantly, they're asking if your name can be swapped, like it's a typo. That was the moment the irritation hit, not as anger, but as something sharper. They really thought I was just a line item, a name you could replace in a document after the fact, like editing the slide deck. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there and watched my inbox, waiting for Mark's next move. It came as a company-wide announcement, of course. Subject line, team update, 2 sentences. Effective today, my name is no longer with the company. We thank him for his contributions and wish him the best. No mention of the deal. No mention of continuity. Just a tidy little obituary, written to protect everyone but the person who actually did the work. People started looking at my desk like it was a crime scene. A couple coworkers pretended not to notice. One guy gave me a quick, sympathetic nod like he didn't want to be seen caring. Mark walked past 10 minutes later, not to check on me, just to make sure I was still small. He slowed down, leaned slightly toward my cubicle wall, and said quietly, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." It wasn't a threat in the movie sense. It was worse. It was the kind of warning you hear right before someone tries to rewrite reality. I looked up at him and said evenly, "You fired me during a live transaction." His smile didn't move. "We'll handle it." Then he walked away. That's when I realized something I hadn't let myself think yet. He wasn't scared because he believed he had cover. He believed senior leadership would protect him the way they always do, by calling it unfortunate timing and sacrificing the quiet person at the bottom. So I stopped being quiet. Not outwardly, not in a dramatic way. I forwarded every relevant email thread to a personal archive, only the ones I was legally allowed to keep. My performance reviews, my role descriptions, the official org charts that tied me to the deal, and the contract drafts that already circulated beyond me. Then I took screenshots of the internal approvals where legal had accepted the key personnel clause, the timestamps, the names, the approved comments. It felt almost clinical. And it was. Because for the first time in my career, I wasn't protecting the company. I was protecting the truth. At 1:47 p.m., my access started flickering. Teams logged me out. The shared drive threw an error. My email began stalling. They were finally doing what they should have done hours ago. But before everything died, one last notification popped up, automatically posted in our internal Deal War Room channel. ELT Emergency Review, Consortium Agreement, Key Personnel Risk. 2:15 p.m. No one tagged me. No one asked me to join. Just a system message that confirmed what Jenna had already hinted at. Senior leadership had discovered the landmine, and Mark and HR were in the room with it. I packed my laptop, walked to HR, signed the receipt for returned property, and kept my face neutral, while the HR partner avoided eye contact like guilt might be contagious. In the lobby, the security guard said, "Have a good one," the way people say it when they don't know they're watching something illegal. Outside, the air was colder than it should have been. I sat in my car again, phone in my hand, waiting for the first call. Because if the deal was really as handled as Mark claimed, my name wouldn't be the headline inside that meeting. And then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. I kept staring at my phone like it was going to confess something. No calls, no emails, no frantic "we need you" message. Just that long corporate silence that always comes right before someone tries to control the narrative. I drove to a coffee shop 15 minutes away, somewhere neutral, not near the office, not near my apartment, because I didn't want to sit at home and spiral. I wanted a table, a wall outlet, a place where I could think like I was still on the job. I opened the HR packet again. It was written the way these things always are: clean, confident, and deliberately vague. Staff reduction. Business needs. Effective immediately. Then the part that mattered. Severance in exchange for a release. No claims. No future litigation. Non-disparagement. Confidentiality. And a clause that basically said if I breathed the wrong way, they could claw the money back. They weren't just firing me. They were trying to buy my silence while they fixed what they'd broken. I turned to the signature page. It wasn't signed. Not by me. Not yet. And for the first time since that conference room door closed, I felt something shift inside me. Not confidence exactly, but clarity. I hadn't lost power. I'd simply been reminded that the power in corporate America isn't moral. It's procedural. It's whoever has the leverage and knows how to hold it without flinching. I pulled up the contract clause again on my personal laptop, the copy I'd archived legally while I still had access. There it was, the key personnel language, sitting in the middle of a giant agreement. Like a landmine someone forgot they buried. I wasn't proud of it. I didn't want the company to depend on me. I'd argued internally that we should build a broader bench, but the client had insisted, and legal had accepted it. And Mark had either ignored it, or worse, assumed it would never matter because he assumed I'd never leave on his terms. That's when my phone buzzed again. Jenna. They're freaking out. CFO asked who approved the key personnel clause. Mark said legal handled it. Legal said deal team requested it. Now they're pulling email trails. I read that twice. Email trails. That meant this had officially moved from HR separation to risk event, which meant Mark wasn't in control anymore. I typed back, "Do not speculate. If asked, tell them the clause came from client red lines and was approved through normal process." She replied, "They asked if you've signed your release." That one made my stomach tighten, because it told me what their plan was. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted me locked down. If I signed, I'd be legally muzzled, and they could present my exit as a clean operational decision. Then they'd approach the client with some polished explanation about continuity and expanded support, and hope the client didn't press the clause. But the client always pressed. That's why it was a 12B deal. I sat back and forced myself to breathe slowly, like I was back in a negotiation call. Then I made one phone call, not to the client, not to the media, not to anyone emotional, to a lawyer. His name was David. Employment and Contracts. He wasn't a friend, but we'd met through a professional association 2 years earlier when he spoke about executive separations and severance traps. After the session, I'd emailed him a question about non-disparagement language. He'd replied with 3 bullet points and a warning. Never sign the same day you're fired. When he picked up, I said, "David, it's me. I got terminated today. HR says staff reduction, there's a severance release. Also, there's a key personnel clause in a live contract tied to me." There was a pause on the line. Not dramatic, just the kind where you can hear a professional switching gears. "Okay," he said. "First question. Have you signed anything?" "No." "Good. Second question. Do you want your job back?" I looked out the window at the street, watching people walk by like they weren't living inside someone else's crisis. And I realized the truth. I didn't want my job back, not under Mark, not under leadership that let HR fire a key person on a 12B deal without verifying the contract. If I went back, it would be as a scapegoat waiting for the next fall. No, I said, I want to protect myself. Then we treat this as leverage and risk management, David replied. You do nothing impulsive. You communicate in writing. You don't contact the client, and you don't sign the release until we've negotiated terms. I felt a strange relief at that, not because it was comforting, because it was a plan. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped. A moment later, an email came through to my personal address. Someone had it from a previous vendor conference registration. Subject line, request to speak. Urgent sender, the CEO's chief of staff, 2 sentences. Can you take a call today regarding the consortium agreement? Please confirm availability within the next hour. No apology. No, we're sorry. Just urgency and a clock. I forwarded it to David. He replied almost immediately. Do not take a call without counsel present. Respond professionally. Offer a time and request written agenda. So I wrote back, calm and precise. Happy to discuss. Please provide a written agenda and include legal counsel on the invite. I am available at 4:30 p.m. I stared at the sent email and waited for my hands to shake. They didn't, because that was the moment I fully understood what was happening. Mark had tried to cut me out of the deal to make it his deal, but in doing so, he'd triggered the one clause that turned me from an employee into a critical dependency. And now the company couldn't just handle it. They had to come back through the front door with witnesses on paper. Jenna texted again. Jenna, CFO just said, if client pauses, earnings guidance is dead. I felt something flash through me, something hot and clean. Not joy, not revenge, just the sudden end of pretending. Because for 18 months, I'd been the firewall. I had absorbed chaos and protected leadership from consequences. And now, for the first time, they were standing in front of the consequences with no one to hide behind. That night, I stopped being the hero. At 4:26 p.m., another email hit my inbox. Same sender. Invite sent. Please join. I opened the calendar attachment. Attendees. CFO, General Counsel, Chief of Staff, HR Director. Mark wasn't listed, which told me everything. They weren't calling me to transition. They were calling me because Mark's version of the story had collapsed, and now senior leadership needed the real one. Fast. Before the client found out from someone else. I clicked accept. And I sat there with my camera off, staring at the join button, thinking one thing. If they were willing to fire me this easily, what were they willing to pin on me next? At 4:30, I joined the call with my camera off and my mic muted. Not because I was hiding, because I wanted to hear who was breathing too fast. The CFO spoke first, tight voice, no warm-up. Thanks for joining. We need to understand what happened today. The general counsel cut in right after him. Even calmer, more dangerous. Before we start, have you contacted the client since your termination? No, I said. I haven't contacted anyone on the client side. A pause, small but loaded with relief. HR director's voice came next, different from the HR partner who slid me the packet. This one sounded older, trained. Did you sign the separation agreement? No. Another pause. Then the chief of staff asked the question they'd all been circling. Walk us through your understanding of the key personnel language. So I did it the same way I always did on deal calls. Clean, factual, no emotion. The client redlined it in. Legal reviewed it. We accepted it after negotiation. It names me as key program executive for 24 months. Removal or reassignment without prior written client consent constitutes material breach. The CFO exhaled like he'd been holding air since noon. The general counsel didn't flinch. Do you have a copy? I have the last circulated draft from this morning, I said. Version 17. Send it to legal, she said immediately. I can't, I replied. My access was cut. But I have the excerpt and the approval thread from legal confirming it was accepted. Silence. Then, you have the approval thread? The CFO asked. Yes. I could hear it now. This wasn't a meeting. It was an extraction. They weren't trying to understand. They were trying to assign the blast radius. The general counsel spoke again. Who initiated your termination? There it was. The real question. I didn't say Mark's name right away. Not as a power move. As discipline. In the room this morning, I said, it was Mark, an HR partner and a legal representative I hadn't worked with directly. The chief of staff asked, what reason were you given? Staff reduction, business needs. The CFO's tone sharpened. Staff reduction on a deal this size is not a unilateral VP decision. No one corrected him, which told me it was true. Then the general counsel said something I didn't expect. Mark represented to us that you were a risk to close. I went still. A risk? I repeated. Yes, she said, like she was reading from memory. He said the client relationship was too personalized, and you were not aligned with the new governance model. I felt the brake hit, clean and final. Mark hadn't just fired me. He'd poisoned me on the way out to justify it. And for a second I understood exactly what he'd been building for weeks. A narrative where I was the problem and he was the solution. He wanted the deal without the person who earned it. I kept my voice level. That's false, the CFO asked. Can you prove it? So I proved it the same way corporate truth is always proven. By forwarding receipts. I emailed the chief of staff and the general counsel 3 things from my archive. The client email requesting the key personnel clause with my name. Legal's internal response confirming acceptance and instructing us to keep it intact. The latest contract excerpt showing the clause unchanged. No commentary, no anger, just documents. The general counsel opened them first. I could hear her keyboard. Then she said very quietly, "This is explicit." The HR director spoke, slower now. If this is accurate, today's separation created immediate exposure. The CFO's voice went hard. Exposure? This is a detonation. Then he asked the question that told me how deep the panic really was. Do you think the client knows yet? I answered honestly. Not from me, but they will. There are standing weekly calls. If I'm missing, they'll ask. And they have their own counsel. If they sense instability, they'll search for leverage. The chief of staff said, "We need a mitigation plan tonight." And then she added, "We need you." But that was just the beginning, because needing me wasn't the same as respecting me. The general counsel took control. Here's what we need to do. We need to bring you back immediately, rescind the termination, and notify the client. There has been no change in key personnel. I didn't react. I didn't argue. I just asked one question. Are you asking me to return under Mark? Silence. The CFO answered instead. Mark is not on this call for a reason. I could almost see it now, them separating him from the problem, like you isolate a failed component in a system. The HR director tried to soften it. We can realign reporting. We can address any interpersonal concerns. It's not interpersonal, I said. It's governance. I was terminated during a live transaction based on a false pretext. I was then publicly announced as no longer with the company, and now I'm hearing I was labeled a risk to close. The chief of staff said, "What do you want?" That question is where people usually get emotional, where they start negotiating from ego. I didn't. I negotiated from safety. I want everything in writing, I said. A rescission letter stating the termination was issued in error. A commitment that I will not report to Mark. An agreement that any client communication about this change will be approved by legal and shared with me before it's sent. And I want a separation option that protects me if this becomes a scapegoat situation. The HR director said, "It sounds like reality." I cut in, still calm. You don't get to pull me back into a burning building without a helmet. The CFO didn't push back. He just asked, "If we do that, will you support close?" I paused long enough to make the point without dramatizing it. "Yes," I said, "but I will not lie to the client, and I will not protect Mark." And that's when the general counsel's voice changed. "Understood," she said. "Stay on. We're bringing him in." A minute later, the meeting door must have opened somewhere. I heard movement, then Mark's voice, too upbeat, trying to sound in control. "Hey everyone, so what's the update?" No one greeted him. The CFO spoke like a guillotine falling. "Mark, why did you terminate the key program executive named in a 12B agreement 12 days before signing?" Mark chuckled once, the way people do when they think the room is still on their side. "Let's not be dramatic," he said. "We had to make a leadership decision. He was becoming a bottleneck." The general counsel didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Mark," she said, "I have the client email requesting his name. I have legal's approval thread accepting it. And I have the clause you claimed wasn't an issue." Mark stopped breathing loud enough that I could hear it. Then he tried to pivot. "We can amend—" "You don't amend a client's leverage without the client," the CFO snapped. "You created breach risk and reputational risk in a single morning." Mark's voice tightened. "I did what I thought was best for the company." The chief of staff replied, ice cold, "You did what was best for you." That was the microsecond I'll always remember. The moment someone powerful finally said out loud what everyone else usually whispers. Mark tried one last move. "He's overreacting. We can manage him as a contractor. We don't need to." The general counsel cut him off. "You don't get to propose solutions now." Then she said, "Mark, you're being placed on administrative leave effective immediately. HR will coordinate." No shouting, no theatrics. Just a sentence that removed him from the board like a chess piece. I sat there staring at my screen and felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, not joy. Relief. Because consequences had finally attached to actions. The CFO turned back to me. "We're drafting the rescission letter tonight," he said. "We'll restructure reporting. We'll send client communication with legal oversight. And we'll discuss a retention package that reflects the risk you're carrying." The chief of staff added, "We need you to help us craft the client narrative so we don't trigger a pause." I answered carefully because words become contracts in rooms like this. "I'll review and advise," I said, "but I won't be the face of a lie." The general counsel said, "Fair." And then right before the call ended, the HR director asked one final question, almost as if she didn't want to know the answer. "If the client refuses consent for any replacement, will you stay through close?" I looked at the calendar in my head, the flights, the calls, the months I'd given away, and I realized something that shocked even me. They thought I was gone. I wasn't, but I also wasn't theirs anymore. "I'll stay through close," I said, "under the written terms we discussed." After the call, my phone buzzed again, an email from the general counsel's office. Subject line, rescission draft, pause, client messaging draft, for review tonight. And underneath it, a second message, shorter, from Jenna. Mark just got walked out. I stared at that line for a long time, because the chaos was real now. The deal was exposed. Leadership was scared. And tomorrow, the client would ask the only question that mattered. Why did your company try to remove the person you promised would be accountable? I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was anxious, because I was working. Old habit. When something critical is on the line, you don't wait for daylight. You control the next morning. At 11:18 p.m., the rescission letter hit my inbox from the general counsel's office. Not HR, not Mark. Legal. It was short, careful, and deliberately unromantic. My termination was issued in error. It was rescinded effective immediately. My employment status was continuous, with no break in service. My reporting line would be updated, pending organizational review. They avoided saying Mark's name, but they didn't need to. Attached behind it was an addendum, my terms. Temporary retention bonus tied to close. A defined role through the first 24 months, consistent with the key personnel clause. A written guarantee that I would not report to Mark and that he would have no authority over my performance reviews, compensation, or staffing decisions. And most importantly, a clean separation option if the company attempted retaliation, reclassification, or a second reduction within 12 months. It wasn't revenge language. It was safety language, the kind you write when you've seen how fast a company will try to erase you. I sent it to David. He replied at 12:03 a.m. Better than most. Confirm they will correct the public announcement and give you a written statement for your file. Also, ensure the client messaging does not imply misconduct on your part. So I did exactly that. At 12:30 a.m., I emailed the Chief of Staff and General Counsel 3 bullet points. Internal announcement correction required. Written confirmation that no performance issue or misconduct led to the attempted termination. Client message must frame this as an internal admin error, with continuity, not transition. No anger, no lecture, just requirements. At 8:06 a.m., a new company-wide email went out. Subject line, correction team update. It said my departure announcement had been premature and inaccurate, that I remained with the company and would continue supporting the consortium agreement. No applause, no apology, but it rewrote the official record, and that mattered. At 9 a.m., I walked back into the building with my badge reactivated and my head clear. People looked at me like I'd come back from the dead. A couple actually smiled. One guy mouthed, "What happened?" And I shook my head. Not because I didn't want to tell him, because I didn't need witnesses making it gossip. The HR partner who slid me the packet the day before avoided me entirely. The HR director didn't. She met me at the elevator bank, posture straight, voice controlled. "Your access is restored," she said. "Your laptop is being re-imaged as a precaution. We'll provide a temporary device." "As a precaution for what?" I asked. She paused. "Standard protocol." I held her gaze. "Standard protocol is not terminating someone named in key personnel 12 days before signing." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I understand," she said, and in her voice I heard something close to what corporate people call remorse, because it's the closest they're allowed to get. At 10:10 a.m., we had the real meeting, not internal, with the client. The call was scheduled as governance confirmation final pre-signing. That was the Chief of Staff's wording. Smart. It didn't sound like an emergency, and it didn't invite questions. The attendees were exactly who you'd expect on a 12B agreement. Procurement, legal counsel, a program director, and 2 people who never spoke unless they were deciding whether to pause the deal. I joined with my camera on. Neutral background, calm tone, no visible bruises. The General Counsel opened with a clean statement. "Before we proceed, we want to confirm continuity of key personnel and governance. There has been no change on our side, and we remain fully aligned on the contract terms previously agreed. No mention of HR, no mention of Mark, just continuity." The client's counsel didn't respond right away. He watched, measured. Then he said, "We received an automated notice yesterday that my name was no longer with your company." There it was, the bullet they'd been trying to dodge. I didn't jump in. I let legal handle it, because this wasn't my job to explain anymore. The General Counsel replied, "That notice was issued in error as part of an internal administrative miscommunication. It has been corrected. My name remains the key program executive as specified." The client's counsel asked, "Was he ever removed?" The CFO, who had joined silently, spoke for the first time. "No," he said. "There was no operational change. There is no change today, and there will be no change without your prior written consent, consistent with the agreement." That sentence did something important. It told the client the adults were in the room now. The program director on the client side said, "Then we proceed." But the counsel wasn't done. He looked straight at me through the camera and asked, "Are you committing to remain for the first 24 months? I answered truthfully but precisely. "Yes," I said. "I'm committing to the role defined in the agreement and the governance structure we've aligned on. Not emotional, not defensive, just aligned." The call moved on. The checklist, the signature logistics, the final red line confirmations. And then right near the end, The client's program director said something that landed harder than any apology. Good, because we don't want to rebuild trust with a new face at this stage. That was the moment I felt calm. Not because I'd won, because the system had acknowledged reality. After the client call, the chief of staff pulled me into a small conference room. No HR, no Mark, just her and the general counsel. Signing is back on track, the chief of staff said. We appreciate how you handled this. I didn't say thank you. I said, where is Mark? The general counsel answered without looking away. He resigned this morning, effective immediately. Not was terminated, not was reassigned. Resigned. The kind of exit companies use when they want the problem gone without leaving a trail. I nodded once, because I didn't need the drama. I needed the outcome. The chief of staff slid a new document across the table. Retention package, she said. Board approved last night. It reflects the criticality of your role. I scanned it, slow and methodical. The number wasn't what made me pause. It was one sentence near the bottom. Key program executive will have direct access to the executive leadership team for any material risk to close or deliver. That sentence was the real promotion. Not title, not money. Authority. The ability to prevent another administrative miscommunication from ever happening again. I signed. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding the company together with my bare hands. 2 weeks later, we signed the deal. 12 Bs, 10 years, global. The press release went out. The stock bumped. The CEO did a victory lap on an all-hands call, talking about discipline and execution. I watched from my desk, listening to words that used to make me proud. Now they just sounded like noise, because I knew what really happened behind the scenes. I knew how close they'd come to blowing it up. And I knew one more thing. They fired me, like I was disposable. Then senior leadership watched Mark and HR try to explain it, and in the end, the only person who didn't panic was the person they tried to erase. That's the part nobody tells you about corporate revenge. It isn't loud. It isn't petty. It's when the system finally has to admit your value on paper, because you stopped letting them pretend it was optional.